Hello, everyone, and welcome to the BuzzStream podcast. My name is Vince Nero. I'm the Director of Content Marketing here. Today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Georgia Gatsby March, the co-founder and PR Director of Unearth PR. Hello, Georgia. Thanks for joining.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, this is going to be a great conversation. Georgia has a great background in kind of a mix of traditional PR and digital PR. So I thought we could talk about the kind of intersection of both of them. Before we get into it, I just want to remind everybody to, like and subscribe, share this kind of stuff with your friends and colleagues so we can help get these great tips and insights from guests like Georgia out to digital PRs and, helping people become better digital PRs and link builders. That's the whole goal of this thing. So, Georgia, I want to start with kind of an icebreaker that we do sometimes with people. And I feel like you're a great person to ask this. What is the coolest piece of digital PR that you've seen recently?
There have been honestly so many good ones, but one that I literally saw yesterday in Lab Bible. So I'm a bit of an action movie fan. I literally saw the Mad Max movie last night and I saw this
Oh,
and I was,
nice.
yeah, this is so me. It was like the best and worst cities to survive a zombie apocalypse. And I just saw it and I actually read the whole thing and I loved it. And it was exactly like a traditional, like really cool digital PR campaign. Like it had all the elements of it. Like it had, I think it was like an interactive landing page, a really like solid methodology. So like even though it was a very like fun piece, it was like really well thought out. I'm not sure the agency, but I think that it was like a rental platform that had done it. And yeah, definitely recommend like anyone just go and Google like zombie apocalypse, and I'm sure it will come up in news, in Google News. But that's so great.
Yeah. Well, so what was the best city? Can't leave us
You know
hanging.
what? I can't remember. I was just looking at my own. I was being so like self-absorbed. Where am I on the map?
Well, that's great. I mean, that's I guess one of the key reasons that people like to do those and what makes those shareable. So I think that's probably a great segue into some of what we're going to talk about today. So let's step back a little bit. So I mentioned in the intro that you have a digital PR and a traditional PR background. It sounds like kind of half and half.
Yeah.
So what I was really interested in talking to you about today was just this idea of like the crossover and what people can learn. So let's start by kind of just defining traditional PR in your experience.
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, having worked in both, I feel like whilst the lines are kind of blurring at the moment a little bit, I still feel like there is quite a clear difference. And it's very much if you work on agency side, you can see that with like the point of contacts and their different priorities, I would say. But traditional PR is very much all about like brand building and having and maintaining a positive reputation. I would say that's like the main objective. So it's all about kind of like brand credibility, building brand awareness. And I would say there's almost like a vanity aspect in traditional PR as well. Not necessarily in a bad way. Obviously, I work in traditional PR, so I wouldn't bash it. But the vanity side of it is more like, okay, what publications are going to make our client look great? So it's very much about like audience or customer perception. Whereas obviously digital PR, we're very much more into like the data and the bottom line kind of figures.
Yeah. So you mentioned a couple of things in there, like this idea of brand building, brand awareness. Do you feel like that is not something that plays into digital PR, or is it just not at the forefront?
I think it's probably more secondary. I think it's still a big thing. Obviously, there's been so many conversations around relevance in digital PR at the moment. So we're always talking about how can we make something incredibly relevant to the brand, what's happening. And then if that builds links as well, then that's fantastic. So I think it's very much all down to things like organic traffic, revenue, then links, then brand awareness.
Yeah, yeah, I like that hierarchy. Well, let's talk about now kind of where you draw the line between traditional and digital. Like, when does it become digital PR?
That's a really interesting one. I think when it becomes digital PR is you can really see it in a strategy. So with the clients that I work with now, I have some that are really strictly like it's very obviously traditional and some that are very obviously digital PR and some that are a really nice mixture of the two. And when you look at a digital PR strategy versus a traditional PR strategy, there's very key differences. So it's things like when you build a strategy, you look at, you know, backlink profiles of competitors, and you're really kind of digging deep into, okay, what keywords are they ranking for, and looking at that kind of stuff. Whereas with traditional PR, it's more kind of the top level of, okay, where are our competitors being featured and that kind of thing. So there's definitely, I think where I draw the line is digital PR is much more data led and strategic in the sense of following that data, whereas traditional PR is more creative in a sense.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so maybe we could talk about a few campaigns too to help really nail down the difference. I mean, I know probably some of our listeners know this, especially those that have the traditional PR background, but like, I've seen things that appear on these like digital PR roundups or like
Mhm.
newsletters that people share, which are great, but I feel like it's like there's some overlap.
Yeah.
Product launches, things like, I see these all the time where it's like, a candle or something that smells like whatever, a candle that
You were
smells like a
reading my
football
mind. That's
stadium.
exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, the candle campaigns, that's a strategy. So something like that where it's maybe not even a real product, right? Like some of these are fake
Yeah.
product, but the goal there, I guess, is to get links, but also like it's a PR play, right? Like it's just like kind of like a news. So where would you take something like that? Like it's really product focused.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I feel like I'm instantly going back on myself because I've just said traditional PR is more creative. Now we're talking about candles and digital PR. So there is honestly such a fine line. I mean, I've done a lot of like product campaigns like that, and they're super fun to work on. And I think where I suppose you can take it is it's very much, I mean, coming from an agency perspective, obviously it might be different in house, but you can really take it in any direction the client's looking for and other internal stakeholders. So, like for me, when I run product campaigns, yes, I'm thinking about, the links, but I'm also thinking about, well, how can we, like, when people actually come onto that page, what can we get from them? Can we get an email? Could we even like make a sale? Is there an actual product we can create here that actually creates revenue for the business? So, I think in digital PR, it's definitely all about that bottom line. And I think now we are thinking more about that than we used to. Whereas we used to think more about links, links, links. We're now thinking, okay, well, how could this impact, social teams or, even traditional PR teams working together to create something. So yeah, it can definitely go in lots of different directions. And it is a very fine line between the two.
Yeah, for someone who doesn't have a traditional PR background like myself, does the bottom line get talked about in calls with traditional PR?
It's very dependent on client to client. I think
Okay.
they really wanna try and see that value, and it can be really, really difficult to prove, with traditional PR because obviously they don't wanna always, like, see those long term, organic traffic influences, like, later down the line. It's more like, "Okay, we've got a piece of coverage, and what's the ROI on this?" And that can be a difficult conversation. But I think people that are very clued up on PR and they come on board and they are points of contact, they're a lot easier to work with in that sense because they understand that, it's not always measurable. And sometimes it's more about, again, like those kind of fluffy, like brand awareness, social shares, things
Yeah.
like that.
Well, so yeah, can we dig in a little bit there because I think it'll help me understand and some listeners like the KPIs for digital PR versus traditional. Like when you're talking about brand awareness, obviously like that's a tough thing to quantify. So what do KPIs look like for traditional PR?
I mean, I think it's different for a lot of different agencies. For me, I suppose I'm a little bit rogue because I obviously like I run my own agency, so I can kind of I'm very lucky in the fact that I have the flexibility to kind of set whatever KPIs I want and kind of have that say so. But what I encourage when clients come in is I say like, look, a lot of these KPIs that are used in traditional agencies are kind of vanity metrics. So it'll be like your coverage views and like number of coverage, for example, very similar to like number of links in digital PR.
Hmm.
But that's not necessarily just because you've got, a million views on a piece of coverage. That doesn't mean that a million people are coming to your website and buying things. So I try and have that open conversation with them. And then in terms of KPIs, we do tend to keep it like quite simple, like number of coverage, but then we do reports where we try and look into like the overall impact. So like measuring things like reputation, share of voice, and that's what we focus on. So try not to have a KPI and focus more on the bigger impact. But if there has to be a KPI, it will usually be something like coverage, amount of coverage.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like you do your best to kind of steer some of the traditional KPIs more towards digital, right? Because it's just easier to quantify.
I think it's so like easy to do that when you've got the experience in both. You kind of accidentally, a lot of the time, I find I accidentally turn a traditional PR client into a digital PR client because they didn't have the knowledge that digital PR existed. And then when I tell them about it, they're like, oh, we want to do that instead. And then it becomes like a nice blend, which is fine. I enjoy it. More work for myself though.
Yeah, yeah. Do you feel that with this idea of like digital PR kind of being more quantifiable, do you feel like the industry is pushing more that way? Do you tend to push more towards that way with people that are coming in with more traditional mindsets or goals? Are you trying to kind of push them to think more about the bottom line and how it all connects and organic traffic, SEO, and everything?
Definitely, yeah. And I think people that are working in traditional PR are, especially those that are working in house, that do become our point of contacts if we work in an agency setting. They are getting so much more clued up now, and there's so much education around kind of digital PR. And I think there's a lot of I've seen like Coverage Book have started. They were always very traditional PR, and now they've started inviting digital PRs onto like their podcast and marketing, and it's happening quite a lot with a lot of traditional PR kind of tools and outlets. So the line again is becoming very blurred. And personally, I if a client wants traditional PR, I can give them traditional PR, but I would advise them in reporting to like look at other things outside of just your coverage views, so they can see real impact. Something I'm noticing a lot from clients in the agency I run, but also in agencies I've been in before, is a lot of clients are kind of trying to get, I suppose, as much bang for their buck as possible. So they may have come on board for digital PR, but then they're requesting digital PRs build links with like founder profiling tactics or product outreach, things that would have originally sat with a traditional PR team. And vice versa, traditional PR teams being asked to report on links, which they never would have had to do before. So I think as the economy worldwide, I'd say probably isn't in the most amazing place. A lot of businesses are suffering. They are trying to get the most for their money by going with a digital PR or a traditional PR, but trying to blend the tactics. So that's interesting as well.
Yeah, I mean, do you think that's what is really the impetus behind this shift is purely monetary thing where they're trying to get the most bang out of their buck, or are people starting to realize that traditional PR maybe isn't as effective? I'm just saying this, I don't know if it's true. What is it that's maybe making this shift into digital PR a little more drastic right now?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, and just purely from what I've seen and my personal opinion, is that a lot of it is monetary. Obviously can't speak for everyone's experience, but just from the amount of clients that I've seen in my last two agency roles and the agency I run now, they are really trying to get the most for their money, and trying to like encourage like different types of tactics. I think where brands used to realize that they could spend maybe whatever the retainer is, like a massive retainer with a traditional PR agency, and they would spend equally as much as a digital PR agency working with both. They're kind of realizing, actually, I want to go with the one that understands both channels, and it kind of leans into that way. And then they obviously get a better value for that by paying less. But yeah, it's a really interesting one. I do think that a lot of brands still see the value in traditional PR on its own and digital PR on its own. But I think, where money is tight at the moment, the industry is changing. And from my perspective, that's a massive factor.
Yeah, we'll see, kind of see how this shakes out in the next few years. I feel like in the US, it seems like we're still a little behind on the pure digital PR kind of
Yeah.
tactics that the UK has been so good at and adopted so well. So, all right, let's get into some of the tactical stuff because I feel like this is what listeners are really going to be here for. So, traditional PR tactics, I
Mm.
feel like there's probably a lot that digital PRs can learn. So, let's kind of break it down into kind of sections. So let's
Yeah.
start with like the pitch process. What are some
Right.
things that digital PRs can learn in the pitch process from traditional PR?
I think the pitch process is the main one for me. And I think it's making sure that we're viewing the journalist from a human perspective and not just as a number that makes up an open rate. I think again, from like working at agencies, I think there's so much pressure on PRs to, hit that open rate, whether it's internal people or clients that are like, what's the open rate? What's the coverage rate? And so you're constantly thinking about the numbers, but actually what we can take from traditional PR that maybe, a lot of traditional PRs I know actually don't even track open rates, which is kind of crazy to me. But they are just purely viewing things from a human perspective and trying to like build on connections. So, like, for example, using like personalized outreach. So, not just saying like hi first name, but actually being like, oh, I read this article you like posted the other day, and it was very like tailored in traditional PR. I think in digital PR, we have not every agency, but a lot of agencies and a lot of independent PRs haven't always used this tactic because we create really good stories. I mean, some of the digital PR stories out there are just so like they are literally like tabloid gold and they just get loads of links and they don't really need that personalization because a journalist, if they see a good story, they'll publish it. But I think, as we mentioned earlier, with the shift of clients wanting kind of more traditional PR tactics and links from that, we need to learn to adapt our strategies and use more personalization so we can get links in, founder profile pieces and product outreach and that kind of thing. Because I think it is going to get harder and harder to cut through the noise for sure.
Yeah, and we talked a little bit, I think, before recording here about this idea of like pushing away from the like bulk outreach and moving more towards the highly personalized stuff. So there's a lot of kind of back and forth with the depending on the people I talk to and the type of outreach they do, where we talk specifically about personalization.
Mhm.
Let's start here. What does personalizing an email look like to you in kind of traditional PR? Like what is the best practice for personalization?
Yeah. So I think it definitely like it's very easy for me to maybe sit here and say personalize every single email you send. Realistically, that's not always going to be possible because of the amount of pressure on PRs. Like we have a lot of clients, we have a lot of work to do. And if we have a media list of 200 journalists and we're sat there personalizing every single email, like that would be the dream. And I would love to be able to do that, but it's just not always possible. So I think what I would advise and what I try to do and put into practice at an is segmenting your media list. So you might have like a top priority and like a middle tier and then like a lower tier. And your lower tier should still be like personalized to a certain extent, but maybe like, for example, in BuzzStream, you can use the like hi first name and then you can kind of like insert like publication names and whatnot. So that helps you get that kind of lower level personalization. Then, you can kind of split it up into the types of publications. So for example, if you're reaching out to like the Sun or like in the US, like the New York Post or something like that, they're a little bit more relaxed in their tone of voice, a little bit more informal. You can adjust your subject line or your intro sentences to match that tone of voice. Whereas if you're going after somewhere like Tatler or Vogue or somewhere very, very high end, they obviously use a little bit more kind of affluent language. So you can kind of personalize it in that way. So really tailoring it. And then your top tier section of that media list, ideally, you would be able to connect with that journalist and say something like, oh, I saw your recent piece on XYZ. These are my thoughts. I've actually got a similar pitch here that I think would work really well for your readership. Here's why it's relevant. And then obviously the more info. So that's kind of the way that I was taught to do it in traditional PR and the way that I've always done it in digital PR. And that works really, really well.
Yeah, I love that. So it's sounds like we're like breaking up our media lists into these are our VIPs, right? Who
Yeah,
deserve that highly personalized treatment. And then there's like lower level personalization where it's at least getting the name right,
100%.
making sure like the industry is right, they are relevant. And
Yeah,
then maybe there's a bottom level where it's like we at least know that these people are in the industry.
exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I love that. I wanted to get to this a little later, but I think it's probably a good thing to talk about now. It's just like this media list, using media database versus building your own
Mhm.
list. Do you always use a media list when you do outreach?
So I recently actually, if this is kind of a fairly new thing for me, I've stopped using a media database like altogether. So I now just use like my master list and update them. So I have like,
Nice.
yeah, it's fairly new for me because I found like when I had my media database, I almost used it. I think this will relate to a lot of PRs. Used it as a little bit of a crutch. So like if I
Yeah.
really, really busy and I've got so much going on, I'll just quickly like just double check my media list, like fits everything on that database. No one has moved around or whatever. Maybe add a few contacts like that, just say, I don't know, like new digital journalist or whatever, and just being really lazy. And that's obviously not great and not best practice. So now that I've not got that as a crutch, I'm finding that, I'm taking that time to like really make connections and get better results. Even though I'm still as busy as always. But yeah, so I think what I tend to do now is have my master media list for the different industries that I work in. And then I will, if I get a bounce back, I'll obviously like update it, find where that journalist has gone, see if it's still relevant, keeping on top of things like Twitter or X, I should say, and like keeping on top of journalist moves, that sort of thing, manually updating it. And then if I'm looking for emails, honestly, I've been so shocked since I've got rid of that media database, how many journalists have their emails now in their Twitter bio and on their author profiles. Like, I swear it's more than it ever used to be, which is just brilliant. And yeah, and then using like the occasional tool to try and find like an email. But I definitely think, updating the media list as well, like based on the topic. So like I have those master media lists, but if I'm doing topical research, like I'll still update it. But again, just using those like similar practices of just, finding the journalist, but just not using a database. Open rates have gone up. Like everything's looking positive. So yeah, I would recommend it personally. It's a little bit more time consuming, but it is good.
Yeah, I mean, if you're getting better results, the time is probably well spent, right?
Exactly, 100%.
Yeah, I love that. I wrote a whole post about building your own media list for free,
Mhm.
and I have always done that. I've never really used a media database
Amazing.
because I think, to your point, like putting the time in to make sure it's the right person and like being able to personalize, like you can only really do that with your own list.
Exactly.
So kudos to you for cutting the cord, for making the switch.
Everybody
I feel like
does.
it's yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay, so let's dig in more to like the target and like audience building process, right? So, what kind of checks do you do? Let's say
Mhm,
this with your media
mhm.
list that you would have done, with traditional PR. Like, what have you learned there to really hone in on the right people and getting these relevant audiences? What can we learn from traditional PR tactics?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think something that we don't tend to do maybe as much in digital PR is connecting with journalists on social media. So obviously they're professional social media. I say that with like a preface that if they're just posting like family photos on Instagram, definitely don't go follow them on there. A little bit weird. But no, like on Twitter and like even on LinkedIn now, loads of journalists are posting on there. And I think when I was working in digital PR agencies and in that environment in house as well, I was always kind of told, make those connections and support their work as well. And that's a really great way to build a relationship. So if they've, even if it's totally irrelevant, if they've written an article on, I don't know, like the economy or whatever, and you're doing something on fashion, but you find that article really interesting, like reply, say, like, or even just like it or whatever it might be, and then make a note of it in your media list that you really enjoyed that article. And then, I mean, I'm saying they wrote about the economy and I'm going to pitch fashion. That doesn't really match up, but we'll just pretend in this case that they're a freelancer and they do lots of different things. But say
I
you're
like it. Yeah.
but say you're then going to go pitch to them later, you can then say, "Oh, I saw this piece," and they'll know that you actually did because you liked it. So that's a great way to do it. And then, in terms of like actually finding and targeting those right journalists to do that too, it's all about relevancy. So again, like not using a media database and just like looking on Google News and other search engines as well, because sometimes Google News might obviously not bring up like everything. You can use things like DuckDuckGo or looking at different like campaigns that have done really well, looking at that backlink profile and seeing what journalists have written about it. That's probably a bit more of a digital PR tactic, but yeah, looking at things like that in terms of targeting and yeah, just connecting on socials is just a really, really great way to do that. And it helps you when you're in your feed as well. You can also like kind of curate a feed in which you're seeing loads and loads of articles come up constantly. So if you're looking at that and you're seeing like frequently the same journalists cropping up that are talking about similar topics, and you're liking those and engaging, that's going to make them remember your name. You're going to immediately think of them. And it's a great way to kind of like expand your own PR mind, I guess, a little bit. So when you've got, a product that's come from a client and they're like, we want you to pitch this, immediately you're like, I know exactly who would like that. And then you pitch it and then they recognize you from liking and supporting their work. So that's a good way to do it as well. I hope that answers your question. I feel like I've waffled a little bit there.
No, that's great. I mean, it brings up another question and thought I've had a lot in this industry is, do you think the people that are most successful in digital PR are the ones that can bring their own personal relationships they've had with other, maybe not personal, professional relationships they've built over time with journalists? Like, I think about it from maybe like a sales perspective or something. It's like people had their little Rolodex of clients or something that they bring in. It's like you would hire someone because of the connections they had.
Yeah.
Do you think about it that way in digital PR? Like, is a digital PR or link builder like only as strong as the connections they've made and can kind of bring them?
I would say no, actually. I would say that, yeah, I suppose that kind of little black book mentality is still very prevalent in traditional PR. But in digital, yeah, I would say it's not the case. And I think there is this misconception that there's a misconception that relationship building and having a relationship with a journalist means that you're like best friends and that you follow each other back on Instagram and you're going for coffees like once a week and you have this amazing relationship. But I think that's what we think of, and that's a misconception. Actually, I would say a relationship is something as little as a journalist, maybe just remembering your name and knowing that you're really responsive for interior expert requests, for example. Or maybe they've got you on one of their lists. Like, I know for a fact I'm featured on a few of these lists and they're so great. It's when a journalist has like a request for a product or an expert commentary and they'll just fire out an email to this list of people or PRs that they know represent those clients. And then you can get back and be responsive. And then you get to stay on that list. Like, that's a relationship. That's a privilege to be on that list. And you've earned your way there through things like, sending relevant content and being responsive and being quick with your replies and, saying thank you if you get coverage. That's a relationship. So it doesn't need to be, I've got my big Rolodex of contacts and that's why you should hire me. I think it's more, if you're a good PR, you have good practices in place and, you are like a reliable contact for journalists, you will naturally create good relationships that get you coverage. And that relationship isn't always schmoozing and going out for dinner. It can look like something a lot simpler.
Yeah, that's such great advice, Georgia. Like this idea that the relationship building is just kind of being on their radar. Like it
Exactly.
doesn't have to be. Yeah, because I talked with an agency owner. We were talking a little bit about like the differences between UK and
Mhm.
US digital PR and how, obviously like the US is so much bigger. And when you think about UK, like a lot of people do talk about like getting, meeting journalists
Yeah.
for coffee and like how I feel like that tradition is a little more prevalent in the UK,
Yeah.
obviously, because it's so small and you can actually do that. But like
Exactly.
if I'm here in New York and I'm trying to reach out to someone in Texas or
Yeah.
something, it's like I'm not going to fly out and meet them.
Yeah.
Right?
That
That
would
would
be,
be
unless
crazy.
you have an amazing company that pays your expenses for that.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, just this idea of like being on the radar. I love that. Do you find in the traditional PR versus digital PR space, the like expert quote request, would you put that solely in the digital PR space, or is that something that crosses over between digital and traditional?
Definitely crosses over. I remember when I used to work at another agency, we would frequently work with, so we were digital PR, we would frequently work with brands who had traditional PR agencies as well. And we would kind of have this like ongoing battle of like fighting over like whose remit is the expert comment. And I think
Yeah.
it's both. And you know what? It totally makes sense because it's absolutely fantastic tactic for link building. Like, I use it constantly for link building, but then equally it's a reputation. It's the reputation of the business, it's the reputation of the spokesperson. So it's definitely both.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about that too, because I think it's a great tactic and that you can speak to. What have you learned there from the traditional PR sense, making it over to digital PR? What can people take from a tactical level there for the like expert quote commentary strategy?
Yeah, no, this I think I actually did a LinkedIn post on this the other day, but I think a lot of yeah, a lot of things that I see in digital PR when I'm looking at expert commentary, and I say this from like a manager's perspective. So I've been a manager in my last couple of roles and managed some fantastic digital PRs. And looking at maybe some expert commentary that had need improvement from the digital PR side is that we're kind of when we're doing an expert commentary, I'll find that a lot of digital PRs will they will maybe just in their expert commentary just explain what's happening. I'm trying to think of an example that shows it. Maybe like if it's a newsjacking kind of expert commentary, they'll just kind of explain what the situation is. But I always say what we can learn from traditional PR is when you're building that reputation, you want to be seen as you want this expert to be seen as an authority. You want them to be seen as someone who is a market leader in that space. So what differentiates this comment to being a market leader in that industry? And it's adding like value, adding a comment that is gonna, change the way the journalist thinks about the topic, or it's gonna bring something totally new to the conversation. Yeah. So it's what value are you adding to that comment rather than just explaining the situation, or a lot of the time it's like giving a top tip or a hack that everyone's already heard of. But no, you need to add something completely new, because when you're using that tactic, you are managing the reputation of that spokesperson, of that expert. So you need to make sure it's giving value.
Yeah, and another great tip there, Georgia. Okay, let's move on to the ideation process.
Mhm.
Again, like we're doing this backwards, probably, but
Right?
we talked about in the very beginning. You talked about this zombie apocalypse, like best cities for zombie apocalypse, right? Like that to me kind of screams digital PR piece, right? But I'm sure there are things built into that traditional PRs love. And let's use that as an example. But what can digital PRs learn from traditional PRs in the ideation process? What makes a great idea from a traditional standpoint? And how can you translate that over?
Yeah. So traditional PR, I think one of the things that we tend to do, or what I was always taught when I first started in traditional PR, was to not take inspiration just from PR. And it would be looking at things like general marketing. So, like email marketing, even like signing up to email newsletters that, not a PR newsletter, but like a newsletter to a brand, like, for example, like Innocent Smoothies, like they always have fantastic copywriting and stuff like that. Or, Gymshark do really great social campaigns. So, like following them and looking for inspiration outside of just the lens of traditional PR. One of the places that I go to all the time is Famous Campaigns. They share loads and loads of like advertising, looking at, what's on billboards and things. And there's so many like CGI campaigns going around right now. And it's making sure that you kind of step out of the narrow lens that is, I suppose, digital PR in this context, and looking at, okay, well, what are other brands doing, like market leaders doing that, could draw some inspiration. And obviously, you don't have to launch a CGI campaign just because everyone else is, but it's just a case of like just getting that inspiration. So yeah, I would say one of the main things we're taught is to look outside of our remit essentially, and see what other brands are doing. And then not just like focusing as well. I used to work for a lifestyle PR agency, and it was very much just, fashion, beauty, lifestyle, and that was it. But I used to take a lot of inspiration from, other places and like movies and TV and all that kind of stuff. So not just being laser focused on your industry and looking outside of that is really great for the ideation process.
I think one thing that comes up there when I think about that is like, where do you know what to extract from an idea? And like,
Mm,
because people can sometimes extract the wrong thing or like get too far outside of their own industry
yeah.
when they're trying to do something like that. So like, how do you think through that?
Yeah. Like always like try and note down objectives. Like I think this is like a really like easy point to think about when you're doing your research or you're looking at things for ideation. always have your objectives. So is it from like a traditional PR perspective, is it that you want to grow awareness for a certain service that you've just launched, or you really want to get coverage for a specific product? And every time you look at something, think, okay, how can I apply that to that objective or that goal? So that's a really great way to draw out something relevant. I think also, like, say for an example, like I've seen tons of like CGI campaigns recently, and sometimes I think they're a little bit cringe. But you can draw good things out of things that you're unsure about. So maybe like if you're looking at something and you really like it, or you like it a bit, but you're not quite sure, try and like look at it and be like, okay, what is it? It might be something as, unique as the composition of the camera angles, or something like really random, or like the font that's being used. So it's not always like, this is like the most brilliant campaign ever. Like you can draw little things from it and be like, oh, I really like the way that, they used a voiceover in that video. And then you might not even go away and make video content, but then you've got that there, and that might spark an idea somewhere else. So that's a good way to draw out good content.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. Like kind of focusing in on what it is that makes this unique to you and translating that over to your piece. I want us to hit on like two other things before we leave. And I know back on LinkedIn, I think one of the reasons that we met, we were talking specifically about outreach proper, using a tool to do outreach and doing like click track, open rate tracking, that sort of thing. You had a great point that when you're using click tracking software, sometimes journalists will just come in, take that link, not even look at, what it's linking to, and just insert that right into the post.
Yeah.
And they're, realistically, like that's not going to be what we need. And like, it's hard for you to find that after the fact. What are your tips there in something like that? Like when you come across that, and then also how to avoid that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, the main thing that you've mentioned right there is to, if you're using like a tool like BuzzStream, for example, if your main aim is to build links, like don't have your link tracking on, because it's just gonna, like, if they do copy and paste your link, it's just gonna be, I'm not sure 100% what kind of link you would call it, but it will be diluted to your website. So it's not gonna have that same SEO value, which is obviously not great when we're trying to build links that have SEO value. So definitely turn click tracking off. That's a mouthful. I think if it's after the fact and you've built a link and you've just realized, oh no, like my link tracking was on, and the links are all coming through and they've all been diluted through this kind of tracking URL, you can still report on it. Like it's still like great awareness and all that lovely, I'm bringing the traditional PR side of me in, like it's still awareness and, all that lovely stuff. I have had it in the past where I've actually contacted a journalist and I've just said to them, look, I'm so sorry, I've accidentally given you a tracking link. Would you mind swapping it to this? And they have done it in the past. So it's not ideal. I feel like journalists do not want to be contacted to change links like that, but I have done it in the past and it has worked. So you can do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, to me, like that seems like the easiest solution. But I guess, yeah, you're definitely right. It's like you don't want to be pestering them about things after the fact. They've done this work for you.
Exactly.
You talk about open rate a lot. I do worry sometimes with like open rates that they can be somewhat misleading.
Mhm.
How do you mitigate for some of the, like for instance, Apple, anytime you send to like an Apple email, like it will automatically say that it's opened, right? Even if they
Yeah.
haven't opened it. So how do you mitigate for some of those things that like the open rate might get conflated? Are you looking at this directionally, or do you use open rate for A/B testing? Like, talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah, a mixture of both. So it's interesting you mention A/B testing. Like that is something that I used to do quite a lot. I feel like I've got it nailed now, like what subject lines are working and what aren't. But definitely, like a few years ago, I would use it for A/B testing. It's something I would still encourage people use for A/B testing. Like if you're trying different subject lines, or maybe you're trying something with an image and something without. Like that could be a really great way to really figure out what's working. And just using it as a guide. I think that's the main thing. Like, don't use an open rate as the be all and end all. Like, I've had some pieces get an open rate of like 98% and no coverage has come through. And then I've had another piece that got like 25% because half of the contacts were out of office, and then it got like 10 pieces. So it's really not indicative of the results you're going to get. I think there's a lot of pressure. If you tell clients that you track open rates, they might get a little bit hooked on that and can start asking. I know that's something that's happened to me before. So it's just about, managing those expectations, even with internal stakeholders as well, and just saying like, look, these are a guide to see how well things are going, but they are not the be all and end all. You can have journalists, it might say on, BuzzStream that they've opened the email 30 times, but you still might not get coverage. And then something might be opened twice and it converts. So it's definitely, yeah, as I said, more of a guide than anything else.
Yeah, that great points. Okay, last thing, I want to see if we can kind of leave listeners with kind of the future of digital PR in your view. Like, where do you see the industry going? What do you see working these days and in the future versus what hasn't been working?
That's a very big question to end on. I like it. I think for me, obviously, like there are things that everyone talks about. So like relevance, like we're definitely moving away from like irrelevant campaigns. I think we've seen on Twitter, like loads of people being called out for doing like irrelevant things, which, I don't necessarily agree with calling people out online, but, I think it's encouraging people to move away from those irrelevant campaigns. So that's definitely a direction we're going in. I think ethics in digital PR is massive now and will continue to be. You're not going to get, well, I hope to not get any kind of health experts as an example, like saying, I'm a health expert, these are my 5 tips. And then
I see. Yep.
Yeah, and then you end up finding out they're just like the marketing manager for a health brand or something like that. They're no doctor.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think we're definitely kind of thinking more about that actual person that impacts when we are, sending out these campaigns. We're being so much more mindful about the reader. We think about links, we get so obsessed with, or coverage views in the traditional PR case, but actually there's someone at the end of all of this who sat there at home reading these 5 tips and might actually go and implement them. So it's really important that we think about that and the impact of our work, and we be really mindful of those readers. So I think that's going to be key in the future of digital PR. I think when we do training for junior digital PRs, I think we're going to factor in ethics in that training, whereas we never used to do that. And I think SEO, again, like obviously we wouldn't have digital PR without SEO. They go hand in hand. But I think in terms of like career trajectories for digital PRs, I think when I first started, like you could just build links and that would be your whole job. Whereas now reporting on organic performance is day in and day out. So I think digital PR and SEO will blend more and more and more in the future. It's just going to continue to kind of, the roles will intersect continuously.
Yeah, I agree with all those, definitely. And I love that idea of creating content that people are going to actually use. I feel like that's something that sometimes gets lost when you're under the gun to create content and get links, and you're just kind of thinking about it from a strategic point of view, but not from like a personal point of view. And that the end user, at the end of the day, we want to provide things that are actually helpful and make the web a better place and everything. And that's probably even more important nowadays with AI overviews coming out and like presenting real information. It seems like that's what we need to be doing. So, Georgia, this has been so awesome. Thanks so much for joining us. You can find Georgia on Twitter, X, Georgia Gatsby PR. She's also on LinkedIn. Like I said, that's where we had connected. So check her out. She tweets and writes a lot of great stuff and shares a lot of great tips. Georgia, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's been great.
Yeah. And again, Georgia, co-founder and PR director of Unearth PR, and that's just unearthpr.co.uk. So check her out there. Check out the great work the agency's doing. Thanks so much for listening, everybody. Again, if you like what you see, please subscribe, share this podcast with your friends. We'd love to get the great tips and advice from Georgia out there to everybody. So thanks again for listening. And thanks again, Georgia.
Thanks so much.